Welcome, everybody. It is a great pleasure and honor to have with us today Professor Michael Hudson. For those who still do not know him, Michael is Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and he is a researcher at the Levi Economics Institute at Bard College. Just to mention a few works published with the help of technology, we want to recall Super Imperialism, the economic strategy of the American Empire, which third edition came out of 2021. Then we have And Forgive Them Their Debts, which was published in 2018. And the latest is The Collapse of Antiquity, that was published in 2023. Michael was also a former Wall Street analyst, a political consultant, and is hosting the Geopolitical Economy Hour together with Radhika Desai, which is broadcast at Ben Norton's YouTube channel, Geopolitical Economy Report. Professor, welcome, and thanks again for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be able to speak to an Italian audience.
That is very good, thank you. To kick off our conversation, would you agree that the Ukrainian war, and even more the latest NATO summit with its final declaration, are showing us that we are now back in a multipolar world, where the global south it is opposed to the Western world?
Well, it's more than just a geographic split. We're really in a civilizational split. And it goes much deeper. What's at stake is what kind of economy is the world going to have? Is it going to be a financialized, neoliberal, post-industrial economy, which is what the United States and Europe are pushing? Or is it going to be the kind of economy that textbooks talk about, where economies actually produce agriculture and industrial goods to feed themselves and essentially make everybody prosper? I almost would use the term Rosa Luxembourg's phrase, barbarism or socialism, because the West no longer has the means of real economic control over trade and production. The West has financial control by having loaded down the global South and even many Asian countries with dollarized debt for the last 70 years. And that holds them in a kind of financial neo-colonialism, a kind of debt peonage. But besides that, the only power that the United States and Europe has to maintain its unipolar control and prevent other countries from going their own way and pursuing their own interests is by bombing them and by terrorism. They don't have a basic industrial or agricultural control anymore because they've outsourced that to China and other Asian countries. So these countries now are obviously saying, well, we want to use our population and our industry and our agriculture to make ourselves rich, not simply to make the United States and Europe rich. We want to take control of our economies and raise living standards and wages. And that can't be done if you're following a policy of privatization and follow the World Bank instructions and the IMF's instructions and say, sell off your raw materials, sell off your land, sell off your public infrastructure, your communications, your electrical system, your water rights, sell them all to foreigners, and essentially get rid of government, let the private sector run everything. Well, there's no way that any economy can get rich without being a mixed economy. There are certain natural things that governments do, and that is provide basic services that otherwise would be monopolized. If the government doesn't provide education, you're going to have what's happening in America, where the average cost of a college education is $40,000 or $50,000 a year. If you don't have public health, you're going to have a very, very expensive privatized health that's not available to everybody, and which in the United States takes 18% of US GDP. And that doesn't leave much room for the overall economy. And most of all, if you let money be privatized by banks instead of doing what China has done and keep money as a public utility, then you're letting the banks decide where are we going to supply credit for, and they're going to supply it not to make industrial growth, not to help economies grow, but simply financial engineering to take over companies and empty them out, like has been happening since the 1980s under Thatcherism and Reaganism. So this split between the West and the rest of the world, the global majority, is really what kind of an economy you're going to have. And that's why the United States is fighting so viciously to maintain its unipolar control. It's fighting against the global majority today in the same way that it fought against the Soviet Union after 1917. It doesn't want a rival kind of economy to develop. And so what you're seeing today is a split with the global majority trying to decide how do we actually design an economy that's going to help us grow. It's a global fracture, and how do we grow if we still have to pay all of these dollarized foreign debts that we've been loaded down with as a result of following bad International Monetary Fund advice to impose austerity, to privatize. The Western model hasn't worked. And you can see that it hasn't worked in the West, and the rest of the world does not want to end up looking like the United States or looking like Germany's looked like since 2022. So I've discussed this in the Destiny of Civilization, and the break is not only against Russia and China, but you could trace the break back to the Bandung Conference in 1955 of non-aligned nations, already 70 years ago. In 1955, what was called the Third World then, or the non-aligned nations, said we're being made poorer and poorer by the kind of world economy that the Americans have set up with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the whole dollar standard. How can we break away? They all knew that the system was exploitative. They knew that it was a new kind of imperialism, a financial imperialism, not a colonial imperialism done by military occupation, but by financial control. Well, they couldn't break away at that time because Cuba, Indonesia, the other non-aligned nations weren't large enough to go it alone. If they would have been sanctioned, they would have ended by the West. If they tried to go it alone, they would have ended up looking like Venezuela has looked like in the last few years, or like Cuba looked like after its revolution. The United States essentially treated it as outcasts. And that is saying, we won't have anything to do with you, go it alone, and we know that you're too small an economy to actually survive on your own. You need us. Well, what's changed is basically the growth of China and also of Russia. And now, for the first time, you have enough nations outside of the United States and Europe being able to say, we can afford to go it alone. We don't have to depend on you. You have no means of economic control over us. In fact, it's you who are dependent on us, not we who are dependent on you. All we have to do is throw off our chains. The normally, you'd think that when countries like China and the global South and India, Latin America, Africa, realizing that they're being exploited, they would take the lead in breaking away. And what's so ironic is it's the United States and NATO that has driven them to break away, by forcing them to go it alone. And ever since the war in Ukraine by the United States against Germany and Europe began in 2022, you've seen the United States use sanctions that, by driving other countries away, it turned out that America and Europe have isolated themselves and left the other countries to survive and do whatever they're going to end up doing. That's what's so amazing of all of this, that it's the United States that has imposed sanctions on, let's say, Russia. Say we're going not to export food to you anymore. So now Russia's producing its own food instead of importing it from the Baltics. We're not going to export industrial goods to you. Russia's making them. With China, it keeps saying we're not going to export chips, computer chips to you, and high technology. So China's developed its own. So when you sanction a country, it's as if you've given protective tariff protection to these countries. Once a country is not able to import food, what's it going to do? It's going to grow its own food. Well, you can see this is going to be happening in Latin America and Africa. They're going to stop using their agricultural land to export plantation crops to the north. They're going to use this land to begin feeding themselves with their own grain, their own rice, and their own food, so that they don't have to depend on American farm exports anymore. This is what's so humorous. The United States has sort of cut its own economic throat, so to say, because once you impose sanctions on a country, you've lost that market forever. They realize that they can never depend on you for imports again. They can't depend on you for food because you may cut them off again. So they'll have to become self-sufficient. They can't depend on you for industry or technology because you can try to disrupt their economy by interrupting. They have to go it alone. So all of the meetings this year by the BRICS Plus under Russian leadership for this year, China has it the next year, are all about how do they become independent and not need the West. This is something amazing.
But as you were saying, Professor, it seems like the TINA paradigm has been basically totally being destroyed, because now we have alternatives. Say that though, it seems like that the European political class is totally subaltern to the Western agenda, and this is really disturbing, at least for us in Europe, because the war destroyed the European economy. And just think, as you were mentioning, to the impact of the sanction that penalized especially Germany and Italy industrial production. And yet, this is not enough for Europe to reverse the course and pull out from this war.
Well, I think that you could call the war in Ukraine since 2022 the American war against Europe, because the great loser has been Germany, Italy, France, and the other European countries. It's as if the United States says, well, if there's going to be a fight between North America, along with NATO, against the rest of the world, we better solidify our control over Europe. So at least we have that as our new colonial power. So essentially, the United States strategists say, we know that America is not able to produce an economic surplus anymore. We've outsourced our industry to Asia. The only new market we can have, if the global majority breaks away, is the European market. So that when they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline and convinced Europe voluntarily to commit suicide economically by not trading with Russia and depending on low-priced Russian gas and oil and raw materials, the beneficiaries have been other Asian countries. The losers have been Europe. So German industry has been moving out of Germany. It's been emigrating largely to the United States, which has been the beneficiary of this. But also, if you're a German company, what are you going to do? You're going to think, well, we can't make it in Germany anymore because the economy is shrinking. We've lost our productivity, which is basically energy. If you look at labor productivity over the last 100 years, it's all goes parallel with energy use per worker. And energy is really the key to the whole thing. And the center point of American foreign policy ever since 1945 has been to control other countries in two ways. Number one, oil. The United States, along with Britain and Holland, have controlled the world oil trade so that they can turn off their electricity, turn off their lights if they try to go it alone and act in their self-interest. Along with oil, the second thing that America has been controlling is grain for food. Let them starve in the dark. But again, the sanctions are essentially Europe has been suffering. And America has fought against the European community ever since it was created, ever since the EEC began working in 1958. America, year after year, was fighting against the common agricultural policy. And for the EEC, the whole purpose of the EEC was to protect its farmers, to do for European agriculture what America did for its agriculture. You have price supports, you want to rationalize agriculture, you want to increase capital investment in agriculture and make it more productive. And gradually, Europe has not only replaced its dependence on American food exports, but Europe has become an agricultural exporter. Well, Europe is right now, the expanded European Union is now suffering because of the sanctions, not only against Russia, but it's forced to support Ukraine, which is dumping all of its low-cost grain in Poland and other countries. So there have been riots in Poland to prevent their farm markets from being basically undersold by the Ukrainians. And you're having what the Americans want to see is a rollback of European agricultural independence so that they can end up being dependent once more on the United States or on countries that the United States controls. So Europe has been the big loser so far. And the effect of this Cold War III has been to drive Europe back into the American orbit. So you could say that what's broken down, the United States says there's no alternative to neoliberalism. All the textbooks say that neoliberalism is how to run an economy efficiently by not having a government, not having government regulation. Let capitalism evolve into monopoly capitalism, which is really finance capitalism, because monopolies are organized by the financial sector. And the United States has said there's no alternative, but obviously there is an alternative. And if countries don't follow an alternative, they're going to end up looking just like Germany. So the whole effect of all of this of what's happened to Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine is an object lesson for the whole rest of the world to say, we don't want that to happen to us. And the neoliberal program is broken down, and it turns out simply to be privatization of the public sector. Well, Europe for centuries has essentially the whole European capitalist takeoff was funded by the industrial capitalists themselves saying, we want to lower the cost of production so that we can undersell other countries. How do we lower the cost of production? Well, if companies have to pay for a health care for the workers, that's going to eat into profits. Let's have the government provide inexpensive health care so we don't have to. Let the government provide education. So if the government trains workers, educates them, makes them high productivity, we corporate leaders don't have to do that. Let the government provide water and electricity at a subsidized rate so that labor does not have to use its wages to buy high cost energy, high cost transportation. We want to lower the break-even costs of labor so that we can undersell other countries. Well, Thatcher and Reagan essentially started a Cold War against labor by saying we're going to privatize the public utilities, and instead of the say in England, instead of the government providing water, which everybody needs to live, we're going to sell it off and let monopolies charge water. And all of a sudden, this is taking a big chunk out of the wage earners' budget. Well, if it takes a big chunk for water, then employers are going to have to pay higher wages. You could say the same thing for telephone service. Instead of subsidized telephone service and communications, privatizing it makes workers pay much more for all of this. So since 1980, the whole European model, in fact, the whole model of industrial capitalism has been reversed. And it's been financialized. And instead of industrial capitalism trying to cut the costs of production, what Marx called the false costs, the faux frais of production, the price of natural infrastructure monopolies have gone way, way up, and labor's living standards throughout Europe have been squeezed at the same time that their wages have to go up so that they can afford paying for privatized services that used to be inexpensive, subsidized government services. So Europe has been made uncompetitive by following the neoliberal model. And the lesson for this, certainly in China, is, well, we're going to have socialism. We're going to lower the wages that Chinese labor needs to make to live, because we're going to provide inexpensive transportation. We're going to provide inexpensive public health care. And most of all, we're going to create money and control the credit system. And instead of the government, the Bank of China, lending money to financial predators to buy companies and take them over and essentially load them down with debt and drive them bankrupt, like Thames Water in England, the government is going to pump money directly into the economy to invest. It's overinvested in housing and real estate, we know, but it's also invested in modernizing the railroad system, the high-speed railroads, modernizing the cities, modernizing the communication system. And all of that could only be done under government control, because the key of the Western financial model is finance lives in the short term. And if you're going to run an economy by living in the short term, taking as much as you can, you're not going to be able to make the capital investment to develop. That's why even the American high-tech information technology industries have not been able to keep up with China, because they use their income, whether for all of the information technology industries, for stock buybacks and to pay out of dividends. Whereas China, because of the public investment in information technology, they use their profits to reinvest in more research and development. There's hardly any research and development going on in America or Europe anymore. It's all taking place in the East, in Asia, because what they're doing actually is rediscovering the whole argument for how industrial capitalism would work in the 19th century. And they're trying to reinvent the wheel right now. You're having them think, well, we know that the Western model doesn't work. What are we going to do? Well, unfortunately, there's very little discussion of classical economics, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, all that came to a head with Marx. And essentially, the only people talking about industrial capitalism and how it expands are the Marxists, because there's been the neoliberals and the universities in America no longer teach the history of economic thought. They don't teach economic history. They only teach there's only one way to run an economy. That's the free enterprise neoliberal way. So when you have European and Asian and African countries send their students to the United States or to England or even the universities in Europe, they're not taught about how industrial capitalism was supposed to take off by raising wages and living standards to make labor more productive. There's just a class war. That's the International Monetary Fund austerity plan. That once a country like Argentina or Chile runs up a foreign debt, the only way that you can earn the money to pay the foreign debt is to get rid of your labor unions, lower the wages, tax labor more, and use the money to pay your foreign creditors. The whole world economy is trying to be financialized, and you can look at the breakaway of the global majority, Asia, Africa, Latin America. You can look at it as saying, we don't want a finance capitalist model. We want the industrial capitalist model that was evolving into socialism. And if you look back in the late 19th century, not only Marx, but all of the political parties across the political spectrum were seeing that there was going to be socialism of one kind or another. The question is, what kind of socialism was it going to be? There was Christian socialism, there was libertarian socialism, there was Marxian socialism, there were other kinds of socialist socialism. This is really, this whole history was so rich, and it all came to an end in World War I, which just essentially was a breaking point in Western civilization. And the rentiers, the landlords and the monopolists and the bankers all fought back against the reforms that were happening. They were terrified of what happened in Soviet Russia. They were terrified of what seemed to be happening in Germany that was looking like it was going to go socialist. They really thought this is the end of the ability of a wealthy financial class oligarchy, the 1%, maybe 5% of the population, getting the rest of the economy in debt, essentially reducing its living standards and winning. So even today, in the United States and Europe, the United States says there isn't an alternative. It is working for us. It's working by the us. It means the 1%. The U.S. economy has polarized, just like the European economies have polarized. All the wealth of Europe, Italy included, has been sucked up to the very top, to the wealthiest class. It is a cosmopolitan class. It's not only wealthy Italians, it's wealthy Europeans, wealthy Americans, the whole financial sector that is draining all of the money from the industrial sector, the agricultural sector, and the commercial sector. All of this is a kind of stateless international class that just has its law of motion is getting the rest of the economy in debt and using the debt to foreclose on if it's government debt, you foreclose on the government's public infrastructure. If it's corporate debt, you foreclose on the company and essentially break it up into parts. all of this has deindustrialized the United States, but it's, well, the economies of the United States and Europe have got poorer and poorer. The wealthiest 1% have got richer and richer. That's why the United States has not joined the global majority so far. And the West has overplayed its hand, as I said, by essentially treating the rest of the world as an enemy. For resisting U.S. control, it's actually driven other countries together to try to create an alternative. And the alternative means not only following different policies, but creating an alternative to the International Monetary Fund, and a whole new set of institutions, their own bank, not the World Bank, but a bank to help their own economic development, not the IMF, but a bank that will create its own credit system to help trade and investment in the global majority increase. A new International Court of Justice that will prevent oil companies and mining companies from polluting countries and not being charged to pay for the cleanup costs that they've caused. And ultimately, there's developing an alternative to the United Nations itself. All of these institutions, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, are subject to American veto power. The United States says we will not join any institution that we can't control by vetoing if they do something we don't like. Well, just in the last few days, President Putin has said, we're going to create a BRICS parliament. We're going to create a whole set of countries that will design a set of the rules of how an international economy should work. And President Putin said the United Nations has a very good set of rules, but the United States has vetoed their application in practice. And the United Nations doesn't really have an army. So we're going to create an alternative BRICS group. We'll leave the United Nations still operating on the sidelines, but the real United Nations is going to be the group of the global majority with their own institutions, and they will be acting as a unit in which the United States does not have veto power. So this is the structure of the world is changing right now, and that's something that economists don't talk about. The economists are sort of tunnel visioned and said, how do we make a profit? How do we raise stock prices? How do we raise real estate prices so the class can get richer on its housing prices rising, even though this prevents people from joining the middle class if they don't inherit their own housing. You're having the economic profession and the discipline no longer talks about how does a country actually enrich itself. This is what the world split's doing today.
Thank you, Professor. There's just another topic that is very important, that we are seeing at the moment, and this is what is happening basically in Palestine, between Palestine and Israel, and the war basically that they call against Hamas. Now, if we think about the Ukrainian war, then we have within the United States of America different position among the politicians. But when they all speak about what is happening in Palestine right now, there seems to be a bipartisan alignment. The example is Trump is saying even more the things that Biden is saying, but even Robert Kennedy, which has a completely different position on Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, when speaking about Palestine, he only sees, supporting Israel up until the end. Why do you think is that?
Well, that's very interesting. The whole world has been shocked by the genocide that the Israelis are fighting against not the Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but on the West Bank. The brutality the bombing of the hospitals, the assassination of reporters and journalists, so that the world can't see what is happening. The whole attack against Palestine that is with American bombs. This attack, it's not simply Israel that's attacking Palestine. This is primarily an American attack on Palestine, just like it was an American attack on Iraq, on Libya, and on Syria. All of this is part of the American attack, saying we're using Israel as our landed aircraft carrier to control world oil. If we can conquer the Near East and control the whole Near Eastern oil trade, we can turn off the power of other countries, as I said, by cutting them off from oil. Oil is the key to American power. Well, that's why they're letting Israel use American bombs on Gaza, and the American intelligence spy network is telling them where to bomb. And it's the Americans that say, in order for you to win, you have to bomb the hospitals first. Don't simply kill Palestinians. You want to injure them. You want to maim them, so that it'll take other Palestinians to take care of crippled children who had their legs blown off or lost their arms. This is so inhuman, so against the whole principle of civilization, that it has acted as a catalyst for other countries breaking away. There was a sort of tendency for other countries, the rest of the world, Asia, the global south, to think, well, somehow we can make do. Somehow we can survive through all of this. And they sort of hope that things will go back to normal. But what is happening in Israel, and it's really the joint Israel-American attack on Palestine, has shocked them into thinking, this is what they're going to do for us. What they're doing to the Palestinians in order to enable Israel to exterminate them and control the oil. The Israelis can then take over Saudi Arabia and its oil, the Emirates, Kuwait. All of this they can do to us, to take, just like they did in Chile and Argentina, to take over our minerals, our land, and our others. This is provided, given a sense of urgency for other countries to say, we have to act now. If we can't just be passive, because what is happening in Palestine can happen to all of us. That's the American plan. It's the Americans that are funding the Israeli attack on Palestine. It's the Americans that are providing the bombs, providing the weaponry, subsidizing the army. This is what is creating the sense of urgency that is catalyzing the World Bank, whereas they realize we can't go slowly, we've got to act fast.
Professor, I know that you're extremely busy, so thank you very much. I want to thank you again, and I hope to have more time with you to go deeper on those topics. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'd hope we'd have a chance to go on longer, and I hope we have a follow-up for all of this.
We will, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.